All right, Rabbi, say good morning, a good tavach. A great schos, Baruch Hashem, to be able to continue together another week in Maseches Avoda. Zara, begin by thanking all of our sponsors, to thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilsim Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shuman Drushos this year as a schos for Besoros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Haba Alinu Latova, Stephen Wendy Drazen, in honor of Israel Drazen, Dina Drazen, Stanley Rosenzweig, Zichron Livracha, and Eileen Rosenzweig. And our week of learning sponsors, Abby and Joe Hirsch, with appreciation to the entire shir, to the entire kehillah, and as a schus for our chayalim and for all of those sacrificing for Klal Yisrael, Am Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, and Mirza Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu should send Besoros Tovos to Klal Yisrael. Should be a week of the return of all of our hostages, success and hashgacha pratis for our precious soldiers, and how that we should be Zochem, Mirza Hashem, that these 9 days that historically have been fraught and filled with difficulty, pain, and loss, should Mirza Hashem be turned around to be filled with should be days filled with bracha, with simcha, and hatzlacha for all of Klal Yisrael. Well, so with that, let us move a lot to do today. So today's daf is Lamed Ches 39. We are picking up Mirza Hashem on Lamed Ches Amud Beis 38b, and we are picking up Mirza Hashem. We left off. Mishcha Shalika, right? Is that correct? I think Mishcha Shalika. Yes. So which is Amar of Sheshes, right? Good. Amar of Sheshes. So I will say, so that is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 lines up from the bottom. So Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes said the following. Hi Mishcha Shalika Daramoi. So this again literally translated boiled or cooked oil. Cooked oil. So the Gemara says, Aser, it is Aser. Now what's the pshat? What's our owner of Safra? What do we have to be concerned about? If ultimately, again, we're concerned that maybe they're going to mix in wine with this oil, misrasari, it'll cause the oil to turn putrid. If it's because of Bishal Akum, that's not a problem. Why? Ultimately, again, it is consumed raw. It's consumed raw, and as we saw in yesterday's daf, anything that is consumed raw is not subject to bishul akum. If we're concerned that they're preparing it in a pot that was used by an akum, and therefore again there's blias, right? Remember again, it'll extract any of the absorptions, and those absorptions will be added flavor. No saint hanlev gamu mutter. We've already established that any of those absorptions will not be value added. Ultimately, again, to that which is cooked in the pot, but just the opposite. Any of those absorptions ultimately again will only be detrimental. Fine. So by name Rabbi Asi. Yes, the fine Rabbi Asi. Hi, hani ahini shaliki daramoi. These cooked dates of the Arameans. What is the halacha? What's the status of them? So again, we're cooking dates over here. So what is the status of those dates? So the Gemara says, sweet dates, not going to be a problem. Why? Because since they're sweet, since they're already edible, so therefore the act of cooking doesn't do anything really to them. Meriri, loti bailacha, devade asiri. Bitter dates, certainly again, those are going to be aser. Why? Because the cooking inherently improves them. Kiti bailacha, so what's the shaila? Mitzi, in the middle, kind of like, again, not sweet, not bitter. So therefore, in those kinds of cases, the cooking process could actually contribute somehow to the dates. What's the status? Amalahu, Maiti Bailahu. What's the shaila? The Rebbe Aser. Rebbe ultimately, again, already said that it's Aser. And who is this? Who is Rebbe in this context? Umanu Levi. Okay, good. So we'll say next case. She sees this. So we'll say, remember again, the Gemara just simply going through all of these various cases of these cooked food items, trying to figure out what's the impact of cooking on these individual items. Does it do something for them, not do something for them? Shesisa. So Shesisa, Rabbi say, now what's Shesisa? We're going to see over here. Rashi says, Shesisa is tafshil ha'asui mikemach shel klayos. So Shesisa was a cooked dish that had a variety of different ingredients in it. Number one, it had ultimately, again, kemach shel klayos means flour of parched grain. So flour parched grain, sheyavshan batanor, v'yeshaosan also mekemach hadashim, ulefi she'misukin yoser midai nosein sham chometz. So I'll say, interestingly enough, so shesisa was a flour-based cooked dish. Now you can make it in one of two ways. It's good to know. By the way, maybe like for the Siyum and Avoda Zara, we could have like a little smorgasbord. Somebody could, I don't know, some of the culinary chavra over here could recreate some kusach, no kusach, right? No kusach, that's for sure, right? Right, but there's a lot of other stuff here that we could sample. So shasisa was a flour-based product. Now it could either be made out of flour, like actual like parched grain flour, or lentil flour. Lentil flour. Now what was the difference? The difference was that if you made it out of lentil flour, so apparently it became very sweet. So what you would often do is you would add a little bit of vinegar in order to go ahead and blunt the sweetness. So by the way, there's a tremendous Musar Haskell in this. When man creates things, so by definition, man is never able to create something perfect. So either something is a little too sweet, is a little too bitter, and therefore something else always needs to go ahead and offset this. You know where you see this more than anything? You see this in the world of medicine. It was like, to me, I always think that one of the most incredible things, there are so many incredible things in the world of medicine. One of the most overwhelming things is like the concept of like chemotherapy, right? That a person, Rahman al-Islam, is suffering from cancer. So what do you essentially do? You wipe out everything in the body. You wipe out everything. And when you wipe out everything, you wipe out the disease also. Just, what's the problem? You're wiping out all the other defense systems in the body as well, which leaves a person susceptible. So you're on one hand, hopefully killing the cancer, but you're also wiping out every other defense system, which is in Asher Yatzar. In Asher Yatzar, what do we say? We say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Rofei Kol Basar Umafli La'asos. Hashem is the healer of all flesh, and He does wondrous things. What does that mean? The Rebbe Shalom is the only thing He's able to heal without compromising. When man heals, if man's going to heal one thing, I'm going to compromise something else. That's just the way that it is, right? You go ahead, you break your arm, you splint your arm. What happens? They take off. Anyone who's ever broken their arm, right? What happens when you take off that cast? Right? Again, it's withered. You need to figure out how to reuse it again. It's fast. Whenever man heals something, he's always compromising something. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the only one who's able to heal. Rofei kol basar umafli lasos. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu could be the holistic healer. It's fascinating, even in the world of food, right? In other words, if I'm going to make a dish, if I make it one way, it might be a little bit too bitter. I have to put in something else. Can we make it a different way? It's going to be a little bit too sweet. Man is incapable of creating perfect results, whether it's in the culinary fashion or in the healing fashion. So man could create beautiful results, but they're always going to be imperfect. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu would create beautiful results in this world. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. So back to Shasisa, all from Shasisa. Who would have thought Shasisa so inspiring? So the Gemara says as follows. So Shasisa, Rav said that it's mutter. Now both say, so just to understand over here, the issue we're concerned about, what is the problem with Shasisa? We're concerned about is, especially if you're making lentil Shasisa, did we introduce vinegar? Because remember again, what's the issue with vinegar? Vinegar comes from wine, right? And therefore, again, we are concerned that perhaps, again, if it's a guy who's making it, and Akum was making it, we have a yayin nesech issue. So Shasisa Rav said it's mutter. Avoda Shmuel Levi asri. They said it's aser. Okay, so now the Gemara qualifies this. If you're making Shasisa, ultimately, again, out of wheat or barley, everyone agrees that it's mutter. Why? Because in wheat and barley Shasisa, no one ever added vinegar. So therefore, there was no concern. But if you're making it out of lentils and therefore added vinegar, everyone agrees that it's going to be aser. So where was the machlokes? Now apparently you can make lentil shasisa, and instead of using vinegar, you could go ahead and use water. So is that permitted? I will say now at first glance, that would seem to be fine, right? What would be the problem with that? So watch this. So one opinion was concerned that if we allow you to make lentil shasisa with water, you'll come to what? Utilize or buy, not make, but buy lentil shasisa with water, you'll come to buy what? Lentil shasisa made with vinegar. Umar savar lo gazrin. Another opinion said, no, we're not gozer. Okay, v'ike da amri, alternate version of this. Betalfachi de maya kol amalo pligi da aser. Everyone agrees that if you're making lentil shasisa, or I'm sorry, you can't buy lentil shasisa even if it's made with water from the guy. Ki pligi bechiti v'sa'ari. And I will say the reason for that is essentially, according to this alternate version, Chazal said, you can't buy any lentil shasisa from an akum. You can't do it. even if it's made with water, because it's so clear. Once you get used to buying lentil shasisa from the akum, it's only a matter of time until you buy the vinegar one as well. So where's the machlokes? Keep ligi bechiti usari with grain shasisa. Grain shasisa. So what's that? Chamar savagazrina ha atuha. One opinion said you can't buy the grain shasisa unless you come to buy the lentil one. Umar savar lo gazrina. The other opinion said no, we're not gozer. They're two different products, therefore we're not gozer. Amarav. Tremine shasisa shadar barzilai hagil adi leDavid. So most of the Gemara just tells an aside over here. Barzilai hagil adi sent two different types of shasisa to David HaMelech. The Chsiv quotes over here the pasuk from Shmuel Beis. Mishka v'safos ukliyotzer v'chitim usaorim v'kamach v'kali upul v'adoshim v'kali. Okay, so two different cooked dishes, one made out of grains and one made out of lentils. Incredible. So v'hashta hu dekamafki tzani. So the Gemara says v'hashta, and now hu dekamafki tzani l'shuki dinarda. And I will say now, presently in Narda, they bring out baskets full of shasisa, and no one is concerned ultimately again. No one is concerned for the Piskei Halacha ultimately again of Shmuel and Levi. That apparently again, certainly with the grain shasisa, there was absolutely no concerns that you may come to mix it up with the lentil shasisa that is flavored with vinegar. Incredible. Ukvashin shedark and lasais l'sochen yains. We'll say the next case in the Mishnah was cooked vegetables, or really it really means preserved vegetables. Kavash means preserved. Preserved vegetables where often or sometimes it was the custom to put wine as part of the preservative. So the Gemara says if that happens, then obviously you can't eat that, right? You can't utilize that. So the Gemara says, Amar Chizkiah, lo sha'al shedarkon. We're talking about only over here that halacha l'maisa. So when is there an isra achila? When it is the derech to go ahead, it's common to put wine into this type of preserved vegetables. Aval bi'adua, but if you know for sure that the akum added wine into the preservation process over here, asra filu bahana. So we'll say, because remember again, if we know for sure that wine was added, then whenever you have wine, you don't simply have an isra achila. Rather, what do you have? An isra hana. Can't get any benefit from it. Umayshna mimorius the sharabanon bahana. Why is morius different, right? Because morius, remember again, the fish innards, right? The fish oil. So remember again, there was also a concern of wine being mixed in over there, but there it was just an isra achila, no isra hana. So what's going on? Hasam is very interesting. Lavuri zuma hachalamatuke taima. Wine was used for two different reasons in these two different contexts. In morius, wine was used, why? To take away some of the fish smell. In kavosh, in preserves process, right, vegetables, it was used actually as a flavor enhancer. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Afilu biyadua nami mutar." Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even if you know they're introducing wine into like the pickled or preserved vegetables, it's still okay. Mutar ba'ana. Why? The Gemara says, "Umash nami murios lavi meir da aser ba'ana." Why would it be different than murios? Shona meir da aser ba'ana. But say tapal b'amates hasam yadia mamashal. Hacha lo yadia mamashan. So the Gemara says over here, here's the fundamental difference. In the case, ultimately, again, of the Morios, once again, look at Rashi. Hasam yadia mamashu shari matbilin bo varotav nechal vayai nechal imo. Gemara says Morios was a dip. So therefore, when wine was added, by definition, murias became part of that very dip. In other words, when you put your bread in there, so you were getting some of the wine. In the case, ultimately, again, of the preserves, Rashi says, Shin ochlan harotav ela hayerek. I will say, so when you were, let's say, pickling vegetables, the brine, right, the liquid is only there as a preservative. It's not there as a dip. So that you would only, no one was dipping anything into the liquid over there. That's why it was treated fundamentally different. Okay. So the Gemara says next, V'taris trufa, v'tzir shein bodaga. The Gemara says, my chilik. So remember again, the Mishnah spoke about chilik. What is chilik? So Amar Rav Nachman bar Abba, Amar Rav, zu sultanis. It's sultan. So we saw this already before. It's a fish, the type of fish. The Gemara says, umipnei ma asra. So why is chilik? Why is chilik sultan is problematic? The Gemara says, mipnei she'ervuna ola ima. Both say, so remember again, the chilik or small fish, which themselves were kosher, were still prohibited to buy for an akum. Why? They were small fish. Because they were small fish, they were sold in quantity. Because they were sold in large quantity, it was very common for non-kosher fish to be mixed in. So because of that, again, the Mishnah says you can't purchase this chilik or their sultanas fish from an akum. The Gemara goes, so both say this is This is actually, we'll say, by the way, just again, tremendous shkach to Rabbi Shmuel Artman for the beautiful, beautiful shalosh this last night. Tremendous, Rabbi Shmuel. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Are there leftovers? No. I think people ate the plates. I think there was, we have no serving pieces left. Okay. So this was beautiful. Tremendous, Rabbi Shmuel. Thank you. Tan Rabbanan. Ein lo achshav. Rabbi say, this is an incredible Gemara. Ein lo achshav. Va'asid legadol achar zman. Rabbi say, listen to this case. What happens if you have a fish, and the fish right now does not have fins? It could be fins and scales, fins or scales. Remember, also the simanim for a kosher fish, fins and scales. So let's say right now you have a fish that does not have these simanim right now, but ultimately, again, it will grow them later on. So we'll say, by the way, this was the case of the sultanas, right? The sultanas, when it's young, does not have fins and scales. When it gets older, it does have fins and scales. So the Gemara said, let's back up over here a little bit. That's really interesting. Is such a fish kosher? Such a fish kosher. In other words, so what's the halacha? So kagon hasultanis va'afitz harezim mutter. Ultimately, it's mutter. So again, halacha l'maisa. If you go ahead and doesn't have it now, but it will develop it later on, the fish is mutter. But listen to this case. Yesh lo achshav va'aseh lahashe b'shasha olam min hayam. So we'll say, what happens if the fish has fins and scales now, but when you take it out of the water, it sheds its scales. Then I will say, what's the halacha? Kigon akunas va'afunas ketaftias va'akastias va'atunas. What's the halacha? Mutter. So we'll say, by the way, I remember when we were in South Africa, this was a shaila that the Beis Din there dealt with. There is a type of fish, I don't know, a kingfish, I don't know, there's no South Africans. But kingfish, right, kingfish. And right, when you take it out of the water, it sheds its scales. Correct? Good. So mamish, this is like, right? So again, this is mamish the Gemara. So the first case, I never heard, I looked into this like a little while ago. I couldn't find like a contemporary example of this, that a fish that doesn't have its fins or scales when it's young, but then develops it. But I'm sure there's an example, contemporary example. But this kingfish is mamish an example. In the water, it has its fins and scales. Take it out, it loses its fins and scales. The Gemara says, either way, ultimately, again, it's mutter. It's mutter. So whether it's young, doesn't have it and will develop it, or ultimately again had it and then loses it when you take it out of the water, ultimately again it's mutter. Both say there's a tremendous musar haskell in this. A tremendous musar haskell. So we'll say, so remember, fins and scales represent the simone kashrus. Fins and scales represent something that is spiritually fit. So what are Chazal saying? Chazal teaching us two tremendous lessons. Sometimes I look at myself, I look in the mirror and I say to myself, Nebuch, woe on me, I don't have my fins and scales. I am not where I want to be in life. I am not the person I want to be. I'm not in the place, whether it's geographically or emotionally, where I want to be in life. And I'm so disappointed and I'm so disillusioned and I'm so upset with myself. What does the Gemara say? Don't despair. Just because you don't have your fins and scales now doesn't mean you can't acquire them in life. Just because I have not yet become the person I desire to be does not mean I can't get there. And you know what? As long as you have the desire to get there, as long as you want to get your fins and scales, guess what? You're kosher now, even before you get them. Because sometimes life is not about who you are, but ultimately, it's about who you want to be. But the reverse is also true. What happens if I had my fins and scales and I lost them? And I will say, doesn't this happen to us many times in life? We make bad decisions, we make wrong turns. I had everything. I was in a good spot. And then I compromised myself and I lost my fins and scales. And I think to myself that I've abdicated my kashrus status. Not true. Even if you lose your fins and scales, right? Even if you're taken out of the water of Kedusha and you lose your fins and scales, you're still kosher. So whether you're not yet the person you want to be, you haven't acquired your fins and scales, or you left the state of being the person you want to be and you lost your fins and scales, ultimately, again, you're still kosher. You're still kosher. There's no such thing as a yid that's not kosher. There's no such thing as a yid that's not kaddish. There's no such thing as a yid, ultimately, who is not beloved in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Rabbi said to me, I've always thought that this Gemara gives us, this Gemara is probably one of the greatest sources of chizuk. Whether I'm not yet where I want to be in life, or I've made so many poor decisions that I feel like I've abdicated my very spiritual standing, I'm still kosher. There's still hope. I can get myself back to where I need to be. Incredible. Sorry. Rabbi Avo announced in Kesari, Kirvei Dagim v'obrin nikin mikal adam. It's very interesting. So Rabbi Avo announced the following. They both say, by the way, why in Kesari? Why in Caesarea? Why in Caesarea? It's a port. Right, so remember again, he was announcing this, right? Where did you buy fish? Again, I will say it's a new thing that we buy fish in a supermarket, right? Again, so where did you buy fish? You bought fish by the port. So he went to Caesarea, and he went and announced the following: Kirvei Dagim, which means again the inside, right? Fish kishkas, the inside of fish. Rashi says shumnon, right? The fat of fish or the oil of fish. And interesting, the ubrin. What do ubrin I will say? Caviar, right? Caviar, right? The eggs of fish. Nikhin mikal adam. You could buy it from anyone. Fascinating, right? You could buy it from anyone. In other words, you don't have to buy it from a Jewish merchant. Why? Because we're saying, now again, this is a geographically specific statement. He was saying because in Caesarea we know that ultimately, again, the port that they're bringing it from are from Plusia and Aspamia. These regions, this is where they're fishing from. This is where they're bringing the fish from. And Rashi says over here, ve'ein dagim temeim mitsuyin sham. So Rabbi Avo is saying is in the port of Caesarea, they're only bringing fish from these locations, Pulsa and Aspamia, and in these places there was only kosher fish. They had no non-kosher species. Kihadam Rabbaye hay tzachanta debav nara sharia. As Abaye says, this tzachanta. Tzachanta was a type of fish. Now Rashi says it's the chilik fish. Right, the chilik fish, same thing as the chilik, sultanis. This tzachanta the bav nara. Bav nara was a body of water. Rashi says bav shemanar. It was the Bav River. Is always permitted. Why? My taima ilay mishum dredifi maya. If you want to say it's because there was a strong current. And apparently non-kosher fish do not have a spine. So because they don't have a spine, ultimately again, they can't exist in bodies of water that have a strong current. Therefore again, any fish in Bav Nara, which has a strong current by definition, must be kosher. But it's not true. We do find non-kosher species in the Bav River. Rather, it must be because is that sometimes we do find kosher fish even in bodies of water with strong currents. So why are the fish from the Bav River automatically considered to be kosher? Rather, it must be because in the Bav River the water was very salty. So the Gemara says, therefore, v'ha dog tame kevin the less they kalfi beduchta de malichi maya lo matzi kai. So apparently, again, non-kosher fish which don't have scales, cannot exist in bodies of water that are very salty because the salt is too abrasive on their unprotected body. So the Gemara says, but it's not true. We do find non-kosher species without scales, ultimately, again, even in salty bodies of water. Rather, it must be because of the silt of the Bav River does not allow for the proliferation, ultimately, again, of non-kosher species. Okay? Ravina says as follows, but now that there are other rivers that empty into the Bav River, so those other rivers have plenty of non-kosher species. Therefore, the cheskas kashrus of the Bav River has been compromised. So whereas once upon a time, you could assume that all of the fish in the Bav River were kosher, now you can no longer make that same assumption. Amar Abaye, hi chamru diamar. Well, it's very interesting. So Abaye, this fish called a sea donkey. That's what it's called, a sea donkey. Shari is kosher. Interesting. Tura diyama, but yet again, the fish called the sea ox is aser. The Gemara says, how do you remember? V'simanich, tame tahar, tahar tame. I say, how do you remember this? That which is tame on land is tahar in the sea, right? Donkey, right? Can't eat a donkey here, can eat a donkey, right? Can eat a sea donkey, right? That which is tahar here, i.e. the ox, you can't eat in the sea. Interesting. The Gemara says, Amar Ravashi, Shafir Nuna, Shari. So we'll say these are all just different types of fish. The Shafir Nuna fish, ultimately, again, is permitted. Kaddish Nuna, Asir. But a fish called the Kaddish Nuna is Asir. V'simanich, Kodesh LaHashem. Okay, Ike de Amri, others say, Kavar Nuna Asir. The Kavar Nuna is Asir. V'simanich, Kivrei Ovdei Kochavim. Okay, Rabbi Kiva, Eklila Ginzak. Rabbi Kiva went to the city of Ginzak. Asal Kameyahu Nuna Tahave Damin Lechipusha. So they brought before him a fish. They brought before him a fish, and the fish looked like a chipusha. And Rashi points out, what's a chipusha? Rashi says, dug tameh, with non-kosher fish. So they were asking Rabbi Akiva a shayla, right? Rabbi Akiva, is this fish kosher? Rabbi Akiva looked at it, and just through ocular observation, right? Rabbi Akiva says, it looks like a non-kosher fish. But Rabbi said, but what did he do? And Rabbi said, here's the incredible part. What did Rabbi Akiva do? Chafye bidikula. So he went ahead, Rashi says over here, he went ahead and he put the fish in a basket. Now, just understand, they gave him a live fish. He put the fish in the basket. When the fish was in the basket, the fish thrashed around. As a result of the thrashing, he saw as a result of the thrashing that there were scales on the side of the basket. So he realized that what? The fish has fins and scales and therefore was kosher. I will say, by the way, what a tremendous story. What do you see from here? See, Rabbi Akiva, when he just looked at the fish, it just looked tameh. Just looked not kosher, looked treif. So we'll say, and a lot of times in life, if you just look at things, it's very easy to just kind of call it treif and call it tameh. If you want to really see if something is kosher or not, you need a bit more investigation. You need to look a little bit deeper. I will say, how many times do we interact with people and just by initial interaction say, treif, tameh, right? That person, no good. Get to know a person a little bit, delve a little bit beneath the surface, and you'll see that the fins and scales are really there. It's also a tremendous insight into the koach of psak. It is very easy to say aser, right? And very easy to say tameh, and very easy to say treif. What a real posek, what a real leader does is try to investigate and try to see whether or not there is a koach de'atera, there is the ability to permit something. Just incredible. Rav Ashi, ikla, and we'll say, by the way, I just want to point out, one last season, we're going to go on. This is so Rabbi Akiva-esque, right? Because what is Rabbi Akiva's entire life hashkafa is to look at things, to see things that the world sees one way, and then to look a little bit deeper and to see something else, right? This is our Gemara at the end of Maseches Makos. Everyone sees the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and they cry. And Rabbi Akiva sees destruction, and what does he do? He laughs. Because when the world sees destruction, all they see is destruction. When Rabbi Akiva sees destruction, he sees the foundation for rebuilding. The world sees a non-kosher fish. Rabbi Akiva says, hey, let's take a look a little bit deeper. And Rabbi Akiva is able to see kashrus. Rabbi Akiva is able to see beauty. Rabbi Akiva is able to see holiness. Incredible. Really, Mar goes weiter. Rav Ashi, Ekla litamduria. Rabbi Ashi went to Tamduria. So the Gemara says, what happened? First white line. Aisu the kameyahu nuna davidami litzlufcha. So they brought before him this fish, this nuna fish, that ultimately again resembled a tzlufcha. So we'll say once again, tzlufcha was a non-kosher fish. So nakti lahad. So again, so what is it kosher? Nakti lahad yoma chaza dahav beit simri v'sharyeh. He held it up to the sunlight and he saw it had scales. It had scales, and ultimately, again, he said it was kosher. Rav Ashi iklalahu asra. Rav Ashi went to a particular city. Aisu lekame nuna davidami l'shafrenuna. So ultimately, they brought him before him a fish, a nuna fish, that looked like a shafrenuna. So we'll say in all of these cases, the fish that they're bringing before these rabbanim looked non-kosher. What did he do? Chafye b'mishchale chiyurei chaze bekalfi v'shayur. He put it in a white bowl, and ultimately, again, he saw scales. Apparently, this was a dark fish. So as the fish thrashed around a little bit, its dark scales rubbed off and became visible on the white bowl. Rabbi Bar Chana ikra da'agma. Rabbi Bar went to Ikr Da'agma. Ultimately, again, they brought before him a tzachanta fish, right? Now, again, I will say, remember, tzachanta is normally is chilik. Chilik is sultanis. Sultanis is kosher, right? That's the small fish that when it's young does not have fins and scales, but develops it as it gets older. So they brought before him a tzachanta. Shamelehu gavra davikarele bati. So interestingly enough, so they ultimately, again, they heard that somebody was calling this fish a bati, calling it a bati. Now, a bati was a non-kosher fish. Rashi says, "V'hu shem dag tamei." Now, says, I want to point out what's interesting about this over here. Right, so Rabbi Chana goes to this place, goes to Akar Da'agma. They brought before him a chilik fish, right, or a tzachanta. That is a kosher fish. But yet, strangely enough, someone was calling this fish a bati fish. Bati is a non-kosher species. Amar midikakarle bati shmamina davar tame ispe. So you know what? So Rabbi Chana said, you know what? I know that it's kosher, but if they're calling it a non-kosher, if they're calling it a bati fish, I'm not going to eat it. What happened? The Gemara said, "Letzafra ayin ba ashkach davar tame." And I remember again This fish, that tzachanta, chilik was a small fish. So often you never got one tzachanta. Rather, what did you get? Whatever, a basket of tzachanta. What's the concern with the basket of tzachanta? There's non-kosher fish mixed inside. Sure enough, the next morning, Rabbi Chana looked in there, and what did he find? He found that there were non-kosher fish mixed into the basket. They were, in fact, non-kosher fish. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi say, it's incredible what happened over here. Kari anafshe lo ye'una letzadek kol aven. He said about himself, Rabbi Chana said about himself, quoting the pasuk from Mishlei, lo ye'una letzadek kol aven. Ultimately, again, for the tzaddik, no misfortune will befall him. I will say, what's the tremendous Mussar Haskell in this story? If something even sounds or looks tameh, stay away from it. How often in life, right, do we encounter circumstances that they don't, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look right, right? Or things that we want to engage in, whatever it might be, entertainment, different things that we want to, and something about it, as they say, like doesn't shmek right? It doesn't look. But again, we are masters at justifying things to ourselves that it's not so bad. Rabbi Chana says, you know what? If it doesn't look right, chances are you're so much better off staying away from it. And even if you can find a way, in other words, we'll say, if Rabbi Chana were to ask you the shayla, could I eat this fish? What would you be the posting? What would you have said? What would you have said? What would you have said? Of course, why not? I don't understand. Just because some shemendrik is calling it a bati, you can't eat it. It's a chilik. It's a chiltis. So it's totally fine. So I kind of had this profound sensitivity. If it doesn't sound right, if it doesn't look right in life, the better approach is veer away. Veer away. Incredible. So we'll say next. What next in the Mishnah was, you can't eat a stalk of chiltis. Now, chiltis was a type of plant. So you can't eat a piece of chiltis harvested by an akum. Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? Mishum the mafsiki le b'sakina. Now, this is very interesting. What do we consider? It's fascinating. Chiltis, remember again, I will say, is not a cooked item. It's a plant. What was the concern over here? The akum uses his knife. Now, what else does the akum use his knife for? Right? For cutting his meat. For other stuff, we're concerned that there is maybe some schmaltz or some schmutz from his non-kosher items on that knife. And when he cuts the chiltis, the schmutz or the schmaltz is going to be on that cut item as well. Now, no sintam lefkam mutter. Now, boss, is very important. Even though Mar said that no sintam lefkam is mutter, now again, so what? So even if there's some flavor on the knife, the flavor will be detrimental, not beneficial. Now, boss, now watch this. Agav churfei dechiltisa mechalya leil shamnunisa v'havile kinosin tam l'shvach v'aser. Ultimately, again, boss, is very interesting. Because chiltis apparently had a sharper flavor, the sharpness of the chiltis plant ultimately awakens the absorptions in the knife and renders them beneficial. Now, both say, I just want to point out, this is a very important halacha. There's a lot of things happening over here. There's number one, because a knife is an instrument used with pressure, therefore by definition there's a greater concern of transference of taste. Couple that with the fact that it's what's called a davar charif, a sharp item. A sharp item is a food item that has a sharp taste, and what that does is that awakens absorptions and makes them beneficial. They both say this is a halakha that is very important to us. Why is it important to us? Where does this come up with all the time? An onion, right? I will say a person has to be very careful what knife they use to cut an onion, because halacha l'maisa, if you use a fleshik knife to cut an onion, the onion is fleshiks. The onion is fleshiks. Even if that knife is totally clean, even if that knife has not been used within 24 hours, that is a fleshik onion. That's very important, because if you then want to put that onion into your omelet, you may not. Conversely, same thing if you did, it's not just like a dinner fleshik, it's a milchik knife. So that's why now again, if you're cooking milchiks or fleshik, you're putting an oven in the onion, it doesn't matter. But a lot of times people use part of an onion, right? And then they want to use the rest of it for something else. So very important that if you're going to use an onion and you're going to use it leftover for a different type of food item, that you use a pariv knife when cutting that onion. Because a davar charif has the ability to go ahead and awaken even dormant absorptions. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, here's the issue with chilik. The chilik is a sharp plant. We're concerned that the akum is going to use his knife to cut it, and therefore, again, it's going to have the absorptions of his knife. I will say, this is also, just as an aside, something very important, a little bit different, but along the same line, it's good to just highlight these ideas. A lot of times you have a discussion about buying fish in non-kosher stores. You go over to a fish counter, buying fish in non-kosher stores. So in general, I happen to feel that, we live in a time where, Baruch Hashem, there are kosher establishments. Patronize kosher establishments. It's a few dollars more. We blow a few dollars here and there on many different things. If you buy your chipa mocha latte chiquita, whatever, then at Starbucks for $19, and they can't even say small, medium, and large. You have to use their ridiculous lingo also, right? You could spend a few extra dollars, patronize kosher establishments, and buy your fish in a kosher establishment. If you're going to buy fish in a non-kosher establishment, one really has to be very careful. You cannot rely on the fact that there's segregation of knives. You cannot rely on any of these things because, again, that's what hashgacha is. Hashgacha says there is someone overseeing a process. There's someone there who's making sure that the knives that get used for meat, they're not getting used for fish, that there's cleaning, there's this. You cannot rely on that if you go into a non-kosher establishment, no matter what the Gentile behind the counter tells you. There is zero ne'emanos, and you have to be incredibly careful. Now, if a person does, is there a way to use it? Sure. Like in other words, if you use a fish like salmon, which again is clearly discernible, I will say, when you bring that home, you must scrape it and wash it and rub it and go ahead and clean it. You cannot rely. And again, that's why it's a bad idea. If there were no kosher options, that's one thing. Sometimes people live in far-flung communities. I guess people from New York think that we are a far-flung community. Okay, fine. I guess everything is relative, right? But again, we feel we're in town. We're in town over here. This is in town, right? So nice again. You have kosher establishments. There's absolutely no need to go ahead and look elsewhere. People who live out of town and don't have access, okay, that's their access. They have to go ahead and look for it, and there's procedures for it. But it's important. These are real halachic issues that exist, and if we don't need to enter into them, much better not to. Okay, the Gemara goes weiter. Avdei Rabbi Levi. Well, it's a very interesting case over here. A little bit of a different sugya now. Avdei Rabbi Levi. So the servant of Rabbi Levi used to sell chiltis. So again, so remember again, chiltis is sultina, right? So the Gemara says he would go ahead and he would sell this fish. Now, I'm saying, just understand what's happening over here. He's the servant of Rabbi Levi, so he's kind of like selling under the hashgacha of Rabbi Levi. So he's selling this chiltisa. Kinach nafshei Rabbi Levi, when Rabbi Levi died, asala kamei Rabbi Yochanan, amru malam mizbamine. So here's what's happening. Then Rabbi Levi died. So what was the shaila? Can we continue to buy from his servant? In other words, does his servant still have the ne'emanos, even though Rabbi Levi is no longer alive? So Amrlei, this is incredible. Avdo shel chaver hari kechaver. The servant of a Talmid Chacham is like the Talmid Chacham himself, which I will say is a pretty tremendous thing. In other words, that yes, the short answer is yes, he has the ne'emanos, even though Rabbi Levi passed away. Incredible. Rav Huna bar Yumi zavin techeltame anshe debei Rav Amram Chasida. Listen to this. Rav Huna bar Yumi used to buy tchelas for tzitzis, the blue dye, ultimately again from the wife of Rav Amra Chasida. Okay, she sold it. So Rav Yosef. So we'll say Sinan, his shaila was, Rav Huna's shaila was, does the wife of Rav Amram have ne'emanos? Does the wife of this, she's selling tcheles, so I don't know, can I Rav Amram wasn't involved in this, right? This wasn't so the shaila is his wife, this was her business, good side business. So she was selling tcheles, right? This was, I guess, the day before his medical billing, so, what did the color? So she sold tcheles. So again, can I trust buying tcheles from her? So the Gemara says, Asa Rav Yosef, yes, Rav Yosef didn't know the answer. Paga bechanan chayta. He came across Chanan Chayta. Amar le Yosef an Yaminale. How would Yosef the pauper know? In other words, how was Rav Yosef going to know the answer to this? Bedidi hava ovda. This happened to me. Again, so what happened? Hanan said, this happened to me. I used to buy my tcheles from ultimately, again, the wife of Rabbanah, the brother of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. V'asay l'kamed Rav Masna, lo hava biyadei. Asay l'kamed Rabbi Huda me'agron. Amar li, nafalta liyad, hagi Amar Shmuel, as Shmuel said, eishes chaver, harei kechaver. The wife of a Talmid Chacham has the status of a Talmid Chacham. Rabbi say, by the way, this statement is very profound in a variety of different levels, but it's saying, fascinatingly enough, is that the wife of a chaver, the wife of a Talmid Chacham, has the same status, the same ne'emanos, the same believability and credibility as the Talmid Chacham himself. The Tanah Abanon, Eishes chaver, harei chaver. The wife of a Talmid Chacham is like a Talmid Chacham. Avdo shel chaver, harei chaver. The servant of a chaver, the servant of a Talmid Chacham, ultimately, again, has also the same credibility as his master. Now, both say, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? You see from here the importance of attaching yourself to great people. Attach yourself to great people. And by definition, just that attachment rubs off on you. That attachment, by definition, endows you with grace. The wife of a Talmid Chacham is great by dint of her attachment to a Talmid Chacham. The servant of a Talmid Chacham is great by dint of his attachment to a Talmid Chacham. Sometimes life is not just about the things we do, but it's about the people we attach ourselves to. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. This is very interesting. Even if a Talmid Chacham dies, his family retains their credibility until they compromise it. In other words, they retain the credibility as if the Talmid Chacham was alive until they do something which compromises it. So if there was a certain marketplace that was known for selling proper tcheles, they retain their cheskes kashrus until it's compromised. Incredible. Tanra Banan. This was an interesting case here. So watch this. So let's say again, Rachel was married to Reuven, and Reuven was an Am Haaretz. Then Reuven dies, or they get divorced. Let's just go with Reuven dies. And then what happens? Rachel gets read another shidduch to Shimon, and Shimon is a Talmid Chacham. He's a chaver. V'chein bito shel Am Haaretz sheni seis lechaver. So too the daughter of an Am Haaretz who marries a Talmid Chacham. V'chein avdo shel Am Haaretz shenimkar lechaver. Or the servant of an Am Haaretz who is sold to a chaver. So we'll say in all of these cases, what's happening over here? These individuals are going up a level. They're going up a level. So what's the halacha Rabbi say? Kulon tzrichin lekabel divrei chaverus. This is very interesting. There has to be like a kabbalah. Because these people are all coming, right? So case number one is a woman who's married to an Am Haaretz. Now second marriage, she's marrying a chaver. Daughter of an Am Haaretz is marrying a chaver. And the eved of an Am Haaretz is now being sold to a chaver. Rabbi say in all of these cases, if these people want to kind of enjoy the credibility that comes with being married to, right? Married to, or the servant of a chaver, they have to actively accept upon themselves the standard of chaverus, right? Chaverkeit. What are the standards of chaverkeit? Look at Rashi. At the end of Rashi, about 6 lines from the bottom. Mitchila kodem shu ne'eman l'kol divrei chaveros sheyochlu b'tara. So what are some examples of being a chaver? Number one, a chaver eats all of his food in a state of ritual purity. That's number one, does everything in a state of ritual purity. And number two, is careful with tithing. So if they want to enjoy this newfound status, they must make the active acceptance of all of these standards. Incredible. Aval, Eishes chaver sheni seis la'am haaretz. But if the wife, so now watch this. What happens if Rachel was married to Reuven? Reuven was a Talmid Chacham, was a chaver, and then Reuven dies, and now Rachel gets a second shidduch to Shimon, and Shimon is an Am Haaretz, so she's going down a level. V'chein bito shel chaver sheni seis la'am haaretz, or the daughter of a chaver of a Talmid Chacham who marries an Am Haaretz. V'chein avdo shel chaver shenimkar la'am haaretz. Or ultimately, again, the servant of a chaver, who then becomes the servant of an Am Haaretz. I will say now, in all of these cases, subsequently, after the second marriage, right? So Rachel marries an Am Haaretz, then her Am Haaretz husband dies, and now she remarries a chaver, right? In all of these cases, the people started out with a chaver, went to an Am Haaretz, now they're going back to a chaver. So what's the halacha? Einon tzrichim lekabel divrei chaveros lechatchil divrei Meir. Meir says, since they understand what's entailed in being married or being connected to a chaver, they need not actively re-accept the standards. Rabbi Huda says, Rabbi Huda Omer, not true. They have to actively re-accept the standards of chaveros again. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Maise be'isha achas, well, says an incredible story. Maise be'isha achas, shenisis lechaver, v'haise kosheres lo tefillin al yado. There was once a story, a beautiful story of a woman who was married to a chaver, and she was so dedicated to her husband's spiritual growth that what would she do? She would help him put on his tefillin. Okay, I don't know, maybe he was sick, maybe he was ill or elderly, so she would help him put on his tefillin. That's how committed she was ultimately, again, to to her husband. And what happens? So the Gemara says her husband died. Nises lamoches, she then married a tax collector. Now, boss, you have to understand something. If in the Gemara's, from the Gemara's, like per se, tax collectors, like these were very unscrupulous individuals. Now, why? What's wrong with being a tax collector? Because these people would often exploit their positions to extort additional monies for themselves. So both say, so the second shidduch was a very different. Right? She married in a tax collector. What would she do? Vaisa kosheres lo kishrei muchas al yado. She would tie the tax receipts to his hand, which is another way of saying she participated in his exploitive schemes as well. Which I will say, by the way, is a tremendous yesod in marriage also, and why it's so important ultimately for husband and wife to try to be on the same page for what they want to accomplish in this world. Because if a husband and wife are united in spiritual pursuits, there is no telling what they could accomplish. But unfortunately, if they're united in degenerative exploits, then unfortunately, again, that'll lead them down the wrong path as well. Amarav, we'll say another sugya over here. Chavis aser b'chos mecha. So we'll say, so now, kind of focusing a bit more on kashrus, well, not a bit more, on kashrus as well, we're going to speak out the following idea. If I'm sending something, suppose here's the case. I'm sending it out. Actually, David Schwartz discussed this with me after David. We were walking to Mincha yesterday. So I'm sending something to a Jew. I'm sending something to Ruvain. I'm sending him an item. And I'm sending it with an akum. Now, how do I know that the item that I'm sending is the very item that's going to wind up with the Jew and that the akum is not going to swap it out for something else? Right? So the Gemara talks about the concept of a siman. Therefore, if I'm going to send to a Jew something, I'm going to send them with a non-Jewish courier. I need to have it packaged in a way that there's a siman, there's a sign. So it's like this. Amarav, chavis aser b'chosim echad. So let's listen to this. Chavis is a mnemonic. Chavis, you need two simanim, two signs. One is not enough. We're going to see what that is in just a moment. Champag, however, champag muter b'chosim echad. Okay, so let's go through this. What's chavis? Chavis is chalav, basar, yayin, tchelas. Milk, meat, wine, and tcheles. So we'll say these are all items where there is a significant concern of tampering. Because there's a concern of tampering, you need two simanim, two signs. So we'll say, I'll give you an example. What would mean like two signs? So imagine I'm sending a piece of meat to a Jew and I'm sending it with my non-Jewish courier. So what do I need? I need to go ahead and wrap it up, and put like a seal on it, a Shmuel Silber seal on it. My birthday's coming, I'm just saying, it's a good, Shmuel Silber birthday seal on it, right? That's anything, that's two siman. So it's wrapped, and then there's mamish like a stempel on it. So two seals on it, so that's for meat, for milk, meat, wine, and tchelas. I'm going to say Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Asur b'chosim echad. So good. So buying these items, if you just send it. So for example, if I were to just wrap up the piece of meat without the seal, that would not be enough. Chosim echad would be aser. So we'll say, so again, what's the issue over here? Rashi says, look at Rashi. Rashi's the first Rashi on Amud Beis. Asur b'chosim echad, l'shagir b'yad ovi kochavim, d'chivan d'basar t'cheles t'mein yikarin, tarach u'mezayef la'achlifan ba'al yayin l'nasko ba'achala parach l'kaman. So we'll say, these are all expensive items. Now, the Gemara is going to ask about milk. I don't understand what's the big deal about milk. We'll talk about that. But these are all expensive items. What are we concerned about? That the akum is going to swap out the item, keep the more expensive piece of meat for himself, and exchange it with a simpler piece of meat. So if there was only one siman, let's say one marker on it, right, or one thing, then there's a concern that he's going to tamper with it. Two already is much more complicated, right? To undo my seal, to undo the packaging, put in a non-kosher piece of meat and get it back just right. He's not going to do it because he's not going to be able to pull it off. So therefore, two seals ultimately, again, is the deterrent for the akum tampering with it. But one seal would not be enough of a deterrent. On the other hand, I'll say champag. What's champag? First line, Lamates base. Chilsis, murias, pas, gvina, mutarim bechosim echad. But these other items, I will say chilsis. So again, we spoke about this before, right? That again, murias, which is like the fish oil, pas, bread, kvina, cheese. These are inexpensive items. So therefore, again, there's a much less of a yitzhar for the akum to swap it out. Therefore, one siman one sign, right? One siman on it is going to be enough to prevent the akum from tampering with it. So one second, let's go through this a little bit. Let's go back to bread, right? Because again, bread is champag. Gemara saying over here, you only need one. So I want to send a loaf of bread, ultimately again to Ruvain. I want to send it with an akum courier. I do need to package it up. I only need one sim. I need to package it. Why? What are we concerned about over here? The Gemara says, let's analyze this. If you're going to say he's going to swap out my loaf for his loaf, so if I'm sending to Reuven a hot loaf and the akum swaps it out with a cold loaf, he's going to be discovered. If I send a wheat loaf and the akum switches it out for a barley loaf, that's also discoverable. Again, I will say, only time the akum is going to swap something out is when he could get away with it, right? But if it's discoverable, he's not going to do it. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, but ultimately, again, and if it's just similar loaves, but for some reason he just wants my loaf instead of his loaf, because there's one siman that is going to dissuade him from doing anything. The Rav, but both say, interestingly enough, by gvina, by cheese, ultimately one siman is enough to prevent him from swapping it out. Why don't we say the same thing by milk? Why don't we say the same thing by milk? By milk we said that milk you need 2 simanim. But why should the milk be enough? Twitch the Gemara. The Gemara says, you're right. Take out milk, and instead put in there what? The ches doesn't stand for challah, rather what does it stand for? Chatichas dag she'en bo siman. A piece of fish that doesn't have an identifying mark. So if I want to send a piece of fish that doesn't, so what does it mean identifying mark? Identifying mark means, let's say I go ahead and everyone knows whenever I go ahead and I cut fish, I always cut it in a way that resembles me. That's my thing. I do fish caricatures, right? It's a side hobby, right? So when I send the fish, it's always in an image. So assuming the fish does not have a siman, if I'm going to go ahead and send a piece of fish with a Gentile carrier, that requires two simanim. So the Gemara says, Hainu basar, but that's the same thing as a piece of meat. So the Gemara says, you're right. Trey gavni basar, two different forms of meat. So again, we're taking out milk. It's interesting enough. So the ches, chalav is being taken out. Chalav is like cheese, and therefore all chalav requires is one siman. And what am I replacing chalav with? Chatichas basar she'ein bo siman. A piece of fish that is not cut, or that is cut in a nondescript way. The Gemara goes weiter. Shmuel says, bayis aser. What's bayis aser? Bayis aser b'chosem echad. Machal muter b'chosem echad. So anything included in bayis, we'll see what that means in just a moment, requires 2 simanim. Machig is good with 1 siman. What's bayis? Basar yayin tcheles aser b'chosem echad. So again, about say meat, wine, and tcheles ultimately again require 2 simanim. 1 siman is not enough. On the other hand, I will say the Gemara says, machag, which is murias, chiltis, and gvina, mutarim b'chosem echad. So murias, chiltis, and gvina only require 1 siman. So the Gemara says, l'shmuel, chatichas dag she'en bo siman hainu basar. But Shmuel would say again, a piece of fish that is not cut, in a discernible way. Ultimately, again, that's the same thing as meat. Which the Gemara says, you're right. Trey gavni basar lo amrina. We don't have to mention the same thing twice. Good. So we'll say, point over here is you begin to see something really fascinating, which is that halacha l'maisa. Now we see that there is a concern even when something is going from Jew to Jew. If there is akum intervention there, we have to be concerned for the possible swapping out of kosher items for non-kosher items. How do you alleviate or obviate that concern? By packaging it in a way that has a siman. Some items which are more prone to swappage ultimately again need 2 simanim, because again they're more valuable, therefore there's a greater yitzhar for the akum to go ahead and swap it out. But if there are 2 simanim, he's not going to tamper with it. Other items which are less prone to swappage because they're less valuable only require 1 siman. Incredible. Tanrabanan, let's go back to 1 more minute. Tanrabanan, ein lochin yemach machag b'Surya. It's very interesting. You can't buy yemach and machag in Surya. I will say, now why not? Because apparently again we're going to see, Rashi points out over here that the shopkeepers in Surya were not careful with what they sold, and they had absolutely no problem. This is actually fascinating. The shopkeepers in Surya were Jewish. They themselves were makbid personally on kashrus, but they had no problem selling non-kosher items to other Jews under the veil, ultimately again, of selling kosher items. Okay, so in other words, they themselves, which is interesting, they themselves personally kept kashrus, but when it came to business, business is business, and they would sell non-kosher items labeled as, or put it out there as, kosher items. Okay, so therefore the Gemara says you can't buy yimach mechag in Surya. What's yimach mechag? So lo yayin velo murias velo chalav velo melech sal kudnoris velo chiltis velo gavina ela min hamumcha. So we'll say so again. You can't. So in general, you can't buy these items in the marketplace in Surya because there is a concern that they're not selling you proper kosher items. Except if someone ultimately, again, is a mumche, if someone was known to be trusted, to be an expert, then you could go ahead and purchase from them. Now, the boss is very interesting. V'kulan in this areach etzel balabayis mutar. So we'll say, watch this. So let's say Ruvain is a shopkeeper in the marketplace in Surya. You can't buy these items from him because, unfortunately, again, the shopkeepers had a bad reputation for selling non-kosher items. But if Ruvain invites you over to his house, you can eat at his house, right? Why? Because these same people were known to keep kosher in their own homes. Now, you'll say to yourself, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. What a hypocrite. What a hypocrite. You'll say, you know what I say to that? Look in the mirror, right? Look in the mirror. We're all hypocritical. We all live with inconsistencies. We're all very proficient in some areas and abhorrent in other areas. That's just the way that life works. That's the way that life works. We're all hypocritical. We're all inconsistent. And that's just people. So Lamaisi, these same individuals that you can't buy from in the marketplace, yet amazingly enough, you can eat at their house because they were known to be meticulous with their kashrus in their homes. All right, we say, hey, Rabbi Shmuel Levi. We'll say, you know what, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up at Miratz Hashem. We'll pick up with this Chavra Miratz Hashem tomorrow. More to do about this tomorrow. We'll say, again, we're fine. Don't worry about it. We're absolutely fine. The next Masech, Miratz Hashem gets much shorter. Chavra on Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. Wonderful to see everyone.
I'll make a quick announcement. Right? We're still on. We'll make a quick announcement.